I work for MEFA, which is the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. And in fact, I'll just tell you, yeah, we have this new technology. So we've been around for over 30 years, and we were created just to help families plan, save, and pay for college, and we have been doing that. We have savings programs, and we have private student loans. Welcome. But everything else we do is just we provide free guidance to families throughout this entire process of sending your children to college, paying for college. So one of the reasons I like to start and talk about this is that we have 55 minutes here right now. This could be a 3-hour discussion, I think. So we're going to move quickly. I want to answer your questions, but this is a great place where you can connect with MEFA afterwards and go on our website. You can always call MEFA, email MEFA, and one other really nice service that we have is if you go to the MEFA website and you sign up for MEFA emails, we have a curriculum where you give us your email and the ages of your students, and we will send you twice a month, we'll send you an email just saying, here's what you need to be doing at this point in the stage of your child's career. So especially when it gets to be 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, there's a lot to do every month. So that's a great way to just stay on track. So I feel like that's a good resource for you. And I'll ask, so who has seniors in high school? Okay, great. And juniors? All right. Hi, how are you? Hi. And sophomores? Excellent. And then younger than that? Okay, oh good, good. And how old are your children? I'll put you on the spot.
He's a sophomore.
Sophomore, yeah, great, okay. So good. This will be a good place to stay connected and have information going forward. I'll tell you also a little bit about my background. So I've been doing this work almost as old as MEFA. I've been working in higher ed financing for about 28 years. I started out in a financial aid office. I was a director of financial aid. Then I worked for a couple of student loan organizations, then the College Board, and then came to MEFA almost 10 years ago. So I've just seen this whole process from a lot of different angles and love to share everything with others. All right, I'll get back to that afterwards. Let's see. So basically, we'll just talk about the college admissions process, current trends, how to create a list, everything you need to be working with your student on, as well as getting prepared for the financial piece. And as I said, we could talk for longer than the 50 minutes here, so we'll move quickly, but raise your hand. I'm happy to have it be interactive. And the first thing I guess I'd like to say, before we even get into it, is that I'll tell you I also have a sophomore in college and a 10th grader. So I'm right in this with you. And this process is probably why you're here right now, right? It produces a lot of anxiety. These are your kids. It's a scary financial piece to think about sending kids to college. And truly, when I talk to parents, I really try to do a lot of just calming us all down. Because the truth is, this is an exciting time in our kids' lives. It's a time to see them think about their future and think about all of the opportunities they have, and they do have a lot of options and opportunities, and help guide them on a good path that will either be a straightforward path or a more circuitous path, but it really should be an exciting, fun time. And yet I do know, because I talk to thousands of parents, that it's not always like that. It's scary. So the more we can just remind ourselves that there are so many positives here, and as I try to do that and live that myself, I will also share that when my son was a senior in college, I remember one particular morning waking him up and saying, okay, you need to go to the guidance office today. You need to find out, when this deadline is, and you need to ask your teacher for this recommendation. And, I gave him the list, and he rubbed his eyes and said, you're really waking me up like this, Mom? And I thought, okay, yep. take it down, and I understand that's how it can feel, because there's a lot to do with all of this process. But again, let's keep in mind all the positives here. So what are some of the big trends in college admissions? One huge trend is that it's become a much earlier process. And I don't really like that it's become a much earlier process, because that ramps up the anxiety, but it has. So I think we just have to say, all right, that's fine, it is a much earlier process. Most colleges now, there has always been sort of an early decision process, and we can talk about what that is. But now, most colleges, even without an early decision process, have just moved everything up and have a lot of early application options. There are many, many students applying in the fall instead of in January or February, which was the more typical and regular process. So again, that moves everything a little bit forward. Especially in New England, students apply to a much greater number of schools. One of the reasons for that is for the admissions applications that are like the Common App. So for example, one application that you can just send off to a lot of different colleges. So it's easier for students to just say, oh, I'll add these 3 schools, add these 4 schools. So students are applying to a lot more colleges. And because of that, colleges sometimes think about this demonstrated interest piece. So colleges are receiving a lot more applications, but they don't necessarily know that that means that all of those students are equally interested. So it's just very helpful that when students really are very interested in a certain college, that they should stay connected with that college. Make sure they visit, make sure they talk to admissions representatives, come to a high school, college fairs, make those connections, even social media, all of those ways to show their interest in a college, so that some colleges don't pay attention to that at all, and some do. It's much more competitive these days as well. I'll give a couple of examples right here in Massachusetts. UMass Amherst is not a safety school for almost anyone. It's very, very competitive, and especially certain programs are super competitive. And it's just the nature of it being a state school, seemingly less expensive than some private schools, and a lot of kids apply. So that's not anything that people can count on anymore, especially in specific programs. Another private school example of that is Northeastern, that for, I would say, our generation, I have some friends who have terrific careers, nursing, engineering, who went to Northeastern, back in the 80s. And it was a difficult school to get through, but it wasn't a difficult school to be admitted to, because it drew from a more local population, and it was large. So almost anyone could, get admitted, even though they had to work hard to get out. So it's not that way anymore. Northeastern has a huge international population, draws from a much wider geographic region, and so another much more competitive school to get into. So all of that causes all this pressure. But what I would say is that, again, we want to have our students kind of pull that down and really research a number of colleges that will be a good fit for them and have options and choices, and they all will have those options and choices. This piece about the parent-driven process, we want the best for our kids, right? Of course. So we want to push them. We're always, on them about things. But the truth is, of course we want to let them know that, but the more that we can let our students drive the process, of course they need little nudges and little fires lit sometimes, but the more that we can let them drive the process, the easier it will be. And I think the better for the relationship between parent and student. And the truth is, the more we let them do, the better off they're going to be when they leave us, because they're going to need to do things on their own. So the more that we can not call, we can let them make all those calls, make all those interactions with the adults who are helping them now and in the future, the better prepared they will be. And that rise of social media piece that that is, colleges, that's the way they're connecting. They're putting their information out there. That's the way they're connecting with students. So I'll just say a quick good and bad thing about that. The good part is, yes, students can be finding out information from their colleges that way, can be connecting that way, can be liking things and all of that, and connecting with students on the campuses to find out information. All of that is a very positive use of social media in the admissions process. The pieces to be careful about are to just make sure that our students, have profiles and information out there that they would be proud to show to any employer, college, all of that. So, and just the globalization piece, that just kind of ties into the competition. There are more students applying to all these schools, which just makes everything a little bit more competitive. So another piece of just overarching advice is just help our students stay organized with this whole process. So as we're doing the things that I'm going to talk about, visiting campuses, college fairs, all of that, have students, by the time they're coming into their senior year, really developing a list of colleges that they would like to apply to, and just doing that in some way, whether it's folders or spreadsheets, or so that they can keep track of everything that's required for admissions at those colleges. Even as early as now, as far as exams, all of those that different colleges require, because admissions requirements are different from college to college. They range from, at a community college, it could be a one-page application, and then the transcript gets sent, and that's an admission application at a community college, to at an Ivy League college that's requiring not just SAT or ACT, but subject tests and lots of recommendations and lots of essays, and so it's a wide range. So if a student can find a way to stay organized with that, that will help you and help the student. This is on the MEFA website. We do have an application deadline manager that students can download in our admissions toolkit and help them with that. So then developing that list is really doing a lot of exploration, 10th grade, 11th grade, to find colleges that will have the programs that students are interested in, and then also finding out things that they probably don't even know at this point. Do they want to be in the city or do they want to be in the country? Maybe they don't know that. So, but they'll explore and they'll find that out over the next couple of years. And really a good way, we'll get into it, is being on those campuses. That's the only way you really know. We're lucky in this area that we have all types of colleges. So if a student is interested in a college in North Carolina or California, maybe you can do a lot of visits here first to get a sense of setting and all of that. And that's the only way students really know. And then the other way they really know is once they might go to the first college, it seems fine, but once they go to a number of them, they can then begin to compare and say, oh, they didn't talk about this there, I had a different feel here. So they'll want to think about the academics, they'll want to think about the setting, and the size is another thing. If you say to your 10th grader, do you want to go to a college with 3,000 students or 20,000? They may not know that, but they may get a better feel from it from talking with students, asking questions, or hearing from students that, oh, everyone in the dining hall knows each other. We all come down in the morning and we see people we know and we just sit down. Or, that's not true, but every weekend I meet new people. So those kinds of things might help a student figure out, do they want small or large? It's hard to know. And then financial, which we will get into and I'll make sure we leave time for. The finances, as you know, is a big piece. So it's not a bad idea to start talking with your student right now about the fact that you want to help them make a decision that's good for all of those reasons, and that they should set their sights high and wide for different choices, but that, depending on the financial aid package that comes back to them, which can be dependent on a number of factors, yeah, maybe they won't go to their first choice. Maybe they'll go to their second choice or third choice, which hopefully is also a great option. But because you want them to make a good financial decision, and you want you as a family to make a good financial decision. So that should all be wrapped in there. The more conversations you can have about that early on, I think the better. I've had so many situations where I've had a parent of a senior in March coming to one of our seminars, and the student, wants to go. They've had their sights set on this one school for 2 years, and they got in, and that's great. And they also got into a number of other colleges. But their top choice is just financially going to be a huge burden, meaning that maybe the student and the parent are going to have to borrow amounts that feel uncomfortable. And yet the student, as a senior, is just saying, I wanted this and I'm so excited I got in. And the parent's feeling like the bad guy. So that's hard when the first time they're having that conversation is March or April of senior year. So the more that you can have those conversations up front and really, I don't want to say stop this, but in a way, if you can, try to discourage your students from falling in love with one college. And I have to speak to ourselves too. Try to discourage ourselves from falling in love with one college, because we don't need to. There are so many terrific colleges doing terrific things, so many options and settings for students. So the more we can keep our options open. So then this is, I feel like I'm getting into the nitty-gritty and I want to move a little faster, but just that on that list, make sure that your student has a number of colleges on their list that they will probably be admitted to. And then they can shoot high and try for a school that might be a little bit out of their range, that's fine. But they should have, and then they should have some safeties too, that they know they will be admitted to and that you can afford and they can afford. So keep all of those things in balance when creating that list. Visiting, I've already touched base on that. Visiting, there's nothing like visiting a college. It's great to look online, but visiting a college, doing both informally, which you can do at any time, attend a sporting event, a theater production, but then formally, maybe once the student is a junior, going on an admissions tour, really visiting some classrooms, hearing some presentations. All of those things will help them be able to compare and contrast and just see the feeling they get on campus. Do the students look happy? Really talking to the students too and asking pointed questions. Those students are happy to share a lot. So get on some campuses and have fun with it. And also they can take advantage of when admissions representatives come to your college, come to your high school, fairs that happen around, and look at all of those. And there's information on our website always, on that email curriculum about where these fairs are taking place. But that's a good way to connect with people. I'll move quickly through this, but again, early decision deadlines and early action deadlines are usually in the fall, regular decision in the spring. And as I mentioned, more and more students are at least applying to some colleges earlier. And there's no right or wrong, but that is happening, so you'll probably see your student want to do that as well. And then there are a number of different types of admissions applications. As I mentioned, at a community college, it might be an online form. But a lot of colleges use one of these type of, the Common App or the Universal App. These are admissions applications where the student goes in and does the application and then can send it to a variety of different colleges. And then sometimes different colleges have maybe an extra essay or have their own specific requirements. But in general, it eases the process. So again, just make sure you and your student know all of the pieces and exactly how to complete an admissions application at every school that they're applying to. And then it will range from school to school, but here are the different pieces. High school transcript, standardized test scores, the SAT, the ACT, recommendations from high school teachers, counselors, usually something like an activity list or a resume to show all of their activities, a personal essay. Fewer schools have an interview and then an audition or a portfolio would be more for very specific types of programs. Some things that just to be thinking about, but I'm sure you know this, your students are in high school, that academics and the high school transcript is really the #1 piece of importance in the college admissions process. So that the high school transcript shows a college whether a student is going to be able to do the work there, and so for many reasons. So one other piece I will say, not only will high school academics be the most important piece in the college admissions process, it can also be important in the financing piece. And financial aid at colleges is awarded usually based on 2 things. One, based on financial need, your need as a family. We'll touch on that at the end. That is important. But many colleges also award grants and scholarships based on merit. And merit is not, the valedictorian of the class gets a scholarship. Merit is just everything that would make your student a good candidate for admission at a certain school in a certain year. So, many colleges will award merit-based scholarships to maybe the whole top quarter of the admissions class, sometimes the whole top half. So it really, again, that's why it's nice for a student to apply to a variety of different schools, because at one college, a student might be in the top of the admissions pool and be awarded a merit-based scholarship, and maybe at another school, they would be just kind of squeaking in with grades and all, and maybe wouldn't be, but that's why keeping those options and choices open is important. But the other piece I like to say about that is it's sort of been common knowledge that people always think of the types of students who get scholarships and grants are, kids who are really good at sports, or especially sports. People tend to, have high expectations on that. But the truth of the matter is most of that merit-based money, most of those type of scholarships are given out for high achievement, good grades, all of that. So it's much more likely that your student will get some merit-based grant or scholarship from their grades. And what does that mean? It just means that hopefully your students are challenging themselves in high school, taking the hardest classes they can without, without over-stressing themselves to the point of it not being healthy and a positive experience for them. And I feel really strongly about that, because I just don't think, students need to be in all honors classes and walking around stressed for the 9 months of the school year. And so pushing themselves in a good way, but able to keep up, enjoy the classes, feel like they're learning, all of that. So there's kind of the good grades versus challenging classes. Improvement over time is a positive. So, a student makes the transition from middle school to high school and maybe doesn't do so well in a math class freshman year, but gets in the right classes and improves over time. That looks really good to an admissions officer. And also, of course, as a student has choices later in high school to take certain classes and certain honors classes and AP, making those choices along the lines of their college plans, if they know them, and many don't, but if they know them, that can be very positive. So going into a science field, showing that they can take those harder classes in those subjects is really helpful. And then the last piece, just being there is a scale that I can show you the website for public colleges and universities as far as what GPAs and SAT scores are relevant for admission. And then most colleges will take the SAT or ACT tests. You will find out the schedule at your high school about when those tests are offered. There is a big movement to colleges not requiring these tests. So that's very widespread. There are plenty of colleges that do not require these. However, what I will tell parents is that if your students should probably take the tests, and if they do fine, they should submit their scores. Because the colleges keep that open. They don't want to require that a student who doesn't test well submit a test score for their application. They want to have a much more holistic view. But that is another piece when they're trying to make that admissions decision. So if your student does well on those exams, by all means you want to submit them. Most schools will look at them and use them in the admissions process, even if they're not required. So just because a college is saying we don't require this, that doesn't mean your students shouldn't take those. And then the activity list. So this is always a big question, you know. How many extracurricular activities should your student be involved in? And the truth is, admissions folks that I know will all say what they want is they want students who can do the work and work hard, show that they challenge themselves, will be up to the classes at college. And then they want students who have other interests as well. And so hopefully your student has, how does your student spend their time when they're not doing academic work in high school? That's what needs to be shown here. And that can be sports, music, drama, robotics club, the school newspaper, the journalism club, all of those things. Or it can be part-time work that they've found an interesting job. They might work with children. They might even, babysit siblings, all of those things. However they're spending their time and enjoying themselves outside of the academics is what's important. So the pressure should really be down here too, and students don't need to add some activity because they think it's going to look good on a college application. They just need to be able to get into what they're doing and enjoy it and be able to talk about it maybe in the essay that we'll talk about. But that is what colleges would like to see. Colleges like the idea of leadership, so if a student is enrolled in an activity and then gets more and more engaged and takes on some leadership roles, that's really positive. But again, this should be fun, not, yeah. Oh my goodness, I feel magic. All right, let's see. I don't know what happened there. This is just about the interview. Many colleges do not require an interview, but if a college recommends it, it's probably a good idea. That's that demonstrated interest piece. So that can be a good thing. And it's great for your student too, to really get a sense and talk with someone, have their questions answered. So I tell students to do two things before they have an interview: to learn as much as they can about the college. They don't want to be interested in engineering and that really isn't a focus at the college and asking all of those questions. They just want to know as much as they can so they are well informed when they go to speak with someone at the college. And the other thing they should do is, I think high school students don't do a lot of this, is they should take some time to think about themselves a little bit. I don't think students necessarily do that, but really spend some time thinking about themselves, what they like best about high school, what kinds of things they're interested in, all of that, so that, because they're going to be asked questions too, and they want to have thought about it. Even things like, what are the last couple of books you've read, or you just wouldn't want your student to sort of not have an answer in something like that. So they can just think about things, think about what they've been doing so that they're prepared. And then they should just relax and be themselves. They should look neat, but they don't need to be, all dolled up in a suit and tie. So now, I'm going to move a little bit onto the financial piece because I want us to have time. But any questions about the admissions piece? Because I know there's probably a lot that we didn't get to. Yeah.
Just want to jump in. You mentioned that, like, for some of the colleges, they like to have the students show the demonstrated interest, but you said then some don't. So is there any information on kind of like which colleges it's worthwhile investing that extra effort and which ones don't really make it a factor?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it will never hurt someone from showing demonstrated interest, but for example, I think it's Duke. I don't want to pick that out, but I saw on the front of the Duke's admissions site, it says, we don't care, basically. They say it in a very nice way. But because they, and so I would almost guess, if I had to, it's, the really, really competitive schools, the Ivy Leagues, maybe, and I don't know this for a fact, but maybe an Amherst or Williams, those schools, they sort of say, we assume, if you're applying here, we assume you're really interested. And I think, read whatever is on the front of Duke's admissions page, because it says it very nicely, that we just assume you're really interested if you come. And they have applications, of course, from students who are, really high academically. So they just have to go beyond that and just admit. So it will never hurt to show interest, but they don't need to be liking things on social media at Duke. Yeah.
To compile the list of the probable target and reach colleges, what's the data that a kid would use?
That's great.
Is it GPA of accepted kids, or is it SAT scores, or what they would compare themselves to or project their chances?
That's great. So on every college website, on the admissions part of it, there's usually information about the profile of the last year's classes. So the student can get a sense of, okay, the average SAT score is 650 at this school, and the average GPA is whatever. And so that's one way. Another, I don't know about Melrose High School, so some of you can tell me. Does Melrose use some kind of a system like Naviance? Yeah. Okay. So within Naviance, too, their guidance counselors can help them. Naviance kind of shows a trajectory and what do they call them? Scattergrams of, okay, all of the students with this SAT score and this GPA going to Wellesley College last year. Here's who got admitted, here's who was on the wait list, here's who got denied. So you can sort of have a sense of the likelihood. So then at least, it doesn't mean don't apply there, but at least the student has some sense of, it seems likely they'll get in. I have heard, again, because my son is a sophomore in college, I've heard that the last 3 years from all my friends and his friends' parents, that they're not quite as accurate always, because the process has gotten so competitive over the last number of years that when you show that 10 years of history of who got in, who was on the wait list, and who was denied, it changes from year to year. It doesn't mean, it's a really useful tool, and it really, I think, allows a student to kind of put together a list that's going to be a good one. But I've just heard of a lot of surprises from year to year. Again, one of them, that students that maybe a few years ago would have been accepted to Northeastern and they're not now, or things like that. But great tools. So the college websites themselves give you that information, and then the high school system, kind of matching those.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If What are the chances of a kid who wants to go to a Massachusetts school versus if they want to go in the South? Do they have a better chance of getting accepted in the South, or several kids from the same high school applying to the same school?
Right, great question. So yeah, every college wants to bring in, they want to bring in the top students, and they want to have a diverse class, right? So that means they want to have someone who's going to be, an entrepreneur, and someone who's going to be a scientist, and someone who's going to be a writer, and so, they want to do all of that. Plus, geographic, ethnic, all of that, they want to have a whole, they want to bring in the most diverse. So geographic is a big piece of that. So yes, I think, sometimes a school in the South, they're trying to get people from all over the country. They would love to expand.
Does that help your chances?
So it can help your chances.
What about
Yes.
kids all from the same high school applying to the same school?
Yeah, and that can be tricky. That can be tricky. And I'll use the sort of way out there example, but let's say Harvard, right? I mean, there could be so many competent students, and I'm sure there are, go down the 10s and 20s of students who could go to Harvard and do perfectly well and excel, right, from Melrose High School. I mean, we're probably going more than the 10s down. But that's never going to happen, probably lucky if one student goes to Harvard, because Harvard has people from all over the world. They need to have diversity. That's sort of, the ultimate example of that. So that can be tricky. I think, a really elite college, again, wants to spread the wealth. And so if a whole lot of students are applying from one high school, again, the reason for keeping that list wide. I don't like to see people just keep adding to the list to, make it so long and paying all that extra money, but keeping it, the more competitive schools that your student is applying to, I think the bigger the list needs to be. Because they could likely get admitted to any of those schools and do really well, but just given the year, the pool, they may not get admitted to some. So that's a good rule of thumb. The more competitive the school, the longer the list.
I have a question about aid from colleges.
Yes.
Obviously, a private school would probably have more money to give out to a student than a public school. But how does it work if a student was applying to a state school, but that's out of state? Does it work the same way, or is it sort of more like a private school if you're applying from out of state?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and then we will dive right out. I'll take your, and then we'll dive into the aid. But yes, it is true that out-of-state colleges, again, because even out-of-state colleges they do want to bring in people from out of state because those students are paying a higher tuition, so that's another reason. But out-of-state colleges will sometimes give some aid so that it eases that a little bit, and that encourages them to attend. And we'll get into the aid right now, but yeah.
Just on my earlier question was, do you have a recommendation on the number of colleges you should apply to?
No.
And what ratios in terms of that reach, the target, and that?
So great. So I don't have an exact recommendation on the number of schools to apply to. But my two rules of thumb are the more competitive, the longer the list. So that could be 10, 12 schools maybe on the high end there. But if a student is applying and the ratio, as I mentioned, most of the schools on the list should be schools that students think they're well within the range of being admitted to. And then some reaches and some state safeties. So the bulk schools but here's the issue. If they're applying to really competitive colleges, then there's never that guarantee that they'll be admitted. Say to the Ivy Leagues and that next group there of, Duke, Wellesley, Amherst, there's just no guarantee. So that's why you have to, that they're falling into the question. So you want to have a number of schools that they will definitely be able to get admitted to. So I'm gonna talk about the 10, 12 being high. 6 is a nice number. If a student is really applying to more schools that they feel like they're right in that range. I know, it's so. But the other piece I'm gonna say is that make sure your student really would like to attend or feel good about attending any school on that list. There is this tendency for students to just say, well, all right, I'll add those because they think. But that doesn't help when it's April and you're trying to make a decision and saying, financially, this really doesn't work. How about this next one? Oh, I didn't really like that anyway. So that doesn't help. So make sure that every school on that list is a school that could be a good option for the student. So then let's talk quickly about the financial aid piece. And again, for continued help with that, you know, stay connected to MEFA. We have webinars where we come to Melrose High School and do a financial aid night, all of that. But some things you can do is just to have a sense when you're researching all these schools, when your students are researching all of these schools, looking into the financial aid piece. And one way to do that is every college has something called a net price calculator on their website. So if you just go to Boston College, type net price calculator into the search, it will show you, and then it'll give you a calculator where you go and put in your financial information. And sometimes even some academic information. Sometimes we'll collect GPA or SAT scores, all of that. And then it will give you a sense of a possible amount that you'll be expected to pay toward the costs, and also a sense of what a financial aid package could look like. Now, it's general, right? It depends on, if you're estimating, it's gonna be an estimate. If you're a couple of years out, it's gonna be a little off. But in general, colleges try to mirror that net price calculator to what their aid process is really like. And in fact, the colleges that ask a whole lot of questions, it's probably really mirroring their financial aid. So you can get a sense. I played around with these when my son was in 9th grade, and I quickly saw that, first of all, there are some colleges that give all their money out based on financial need. So those calculators wouldn't ask you anything about GPA. And then there are other calculators that ask about GPA and SAT scores, and you can see, as you play around and make that go up and down, that the aid goes up and down, and that way you know that the school has, you know, a merit-based component to the aid that they give. So it's a good way. I would never say that you should say to your students, don't apply to BU, it costs $65,000 and that isn't doable for us. But what you might say is, you know, we got the, and I'm just picking on BU for no reason, but we got the, I saw this net price calculator, you know, at your GPA and SAT score and our financial need, we weren't offered any scholarship, you know, at BU. At a school like that, you would probably need to receive something to make it doable. So let's look at some others too. So just, again, to keep the conversations going and to keep the search a little bit wider. I think these can be really useful. Another piece that you will apply for financial aid fall of senior year. So really the nitty-gritty you don't have to do right now, but before then, just like your student will do for the admissions process and find out what forms are required and all of that, you'll do the same thing, they'll do the same thing, or you will, for the financial aid process. Find out for every school what makes a completed financial aid application and what is the financial aid deadline. Because they're all different and they're a little different than the admissions deadlines. But what's nice is you can just then figure that out and just apply for financial aid by the earliest deadline. So if your child is going to apply to one school early action in November, then you just do it all in November, do the whole financial aid process, and then you're covered for all the other deadlines all the way through the spring. Before I get to the last piece, or no, I will get to the last piece, because the next slides I think show you what the financial aid applications look like, but one other piece is that I'll first say that most financial aid that you're going to receive is through a financial aid process and money that comes from the federal government, the state, and the colleges and universities themselves. And that's the big financial aid process that you should be a part of. But there are some outside organizations that have scholarships. So maybe in Melrose, there are some that the high school will have access to. So find out at the high school if there's an application form that your student can submit to be eligible for some of those. Your employers, any community organizations you're involved with, there might be some other scholarships. So just, you can become aware of those now. I always tell the story that my dentist, a couple of years ago, I walked into my dentist office and there was a little card by the extra toothpaste there that said, you know, she gives out 2 college scholarships to 2 good community servants who are patients of hers. So it's just a time to keep your eyes open for any of those things. Both local, and your student can do some online scholarship searches as well. I do find that most students are more successful finding money closer to home, but depending on the academic level of your student and all, there are big Coca-Cola scholarships and things like that out there that they can look into. But then the financial aid, these are the 2 financial aid forms. The main one is the Fafsa, the free application for federal student aid. Every college requires that. So you will do that fall of senior year. You can do that starting in October, fall of senior year. And the nice thing now, has anyone applied for financial aid before? Okay. So there's a big change that the rest of you won't know how good you have it. But there's a big change where, first of all, it's ready in October now, so that gives a little extra time to do it. And secondly, so this year, so this will help you think about your own year. This year, in 2016, it's asking parents about their 2015 income. So the nice piece about that is those taxes are already done. It used to ask people to estimate and they had to go back and correct, and it was a nightmare. So the nice thing is, when you're doing this in the fall, you're going to be using an old tax return that's already completed that makes it fairly easy, much easier than it was before, to fill out the FAFSA. Yeah.
And then you can actually ask them to access your, go to the IRS, and they'll just pull that information in.
Exactly.
I was ecstatic about.
And it's a lot easier, right?
Yeah, so all the columns are filled in, and it'll just say transferred from the IRS, so it's automatic.
It used to.
You just give them access? Or
You give them permission to do it, and they just
Pull it right in.
In all the right columns. I was worried about putting the wrong numbers in the wrong columns, and you just check a button, and it all flows in there.
Yeah. So that really is easy. The piece that complicates it a little bit is that many schools, and especially schools that have a lot of their own scholarship and grant dollars to award, will have you, and a lot in this area, will have you fill out this CSS profile form from the College Board. And so that is a form. It's also online. This one is free, as it says. This one costs a little fee, $25, and then $16 for each additional school. It asks more questions because the colleges that have a lot of their own dollars want more information from you to make sure they're giving out their money, the right way. So this one takes a little extra time, but again, open in October, you have time to do it. Your taxes are all done, so it's not as complicated. And if you want help with that, you can always call MEFA. You can watch, we have webinars, on completing that. So, for example, just so you get a sense of the differences between the two forms, the free application for federal student aid doesn't ask anything about, first I'd say, your income is a big driver for this financial aid process, much more so than your assets, actually. So, for example, the free application for federal student aid doesn't ask you anything about your home that you live in, your primary residence, nothing, no questions at all. So that's nice. It also doesn't ask you anything about retirement accounts. So that's any lump sum of retirement that you have out there, nothing. Also, if you have a family business that has under 100 employees, that's not counted. And a last thing, if parents are divorced or separated on the FAFSA, it's the custodial parent, which I could give you the definition if you wanted, is the only one who files the FAFSA with the student. So suffice it to say, a lot is sort of left out of the FAFSA. But that's why colleges that give out a lot of their own money want to ask more questions. So this will ask you, what is your home worth, what's owed on it? We'll ask you more questions if you own a business. And if parents are divorced or separated, it will have both parents fill out information to get factored into the process. So just make sure you know which schools require which and do all of them by the deadlines. And then these are just some other helpful websites. So I talked about the net price calculators. These, College Navigator, College Scorecard, those are good websites to just get a sense of comparing different schools, all kinds of things, from crime statistics to faculty-student ratio to percentage of families that receive financial aid at what incomes, all kinds of things like that. And YPFF, you use Naviance. YPFF is just MEFA's free system that's kind of like Naviance. So that's there for you, but I think Naviance has some of those great tools too. And then these are some other useful. I can figure out a way that I can get you my presentation. Let me do that so you're not having to. So we have, I think, 5 minutes maybe. And I know there's so much more we can talk about, but what other burning questions from?
I just had a general question about finance. It's kind of specific for finance, but it's I've heard different things about 529 accounts. Some that say, you know, you shouldn't put stuff in a 529 because it'll just suck it all dry, and other people say no, that the formula only counts like a certain percentage on that. So I'm wondering what's.
Yes, and actually I know you're probably tired with the college and you want to go off to the other great sessions that are here, but next we're going to talk about early college planning, and I am a huge promoter of 529 plans.
Okay.
I do think it's a great way to save, so the reality is, and this is an important statistic or important data point, is your assets are figured into this process, and we didn't really get into this too much, at about 5.6%. So what I say to people is, if you have $10,000 in assets, including a 529 or 529 plan being an asset, then that increases the amount you're going to be expected to pay for college in a given year by $560. So, all of your whole financial situation is taken into account, but your assets, I would say, are fairly reasonably taken into account. If you have $100,000 in assets, that increases what you're expected to pay each year by $5,600. That's not bad, versus a lot is expected from our incomes. So in those, I only talk about net price calculators. Another type of calculator out there is an expected family contribution calculator. So if you just Google EFC calculators, and the one at the College Board is decent. That show, if you go through that and change things, you can see that your income going up and down has a big effect on what's going to be expected of you to pay. Your assets have a smaller effect. And yet most of the questions I get from families are, should I move, should I pay off my mortgage, and all these things. So, and you saw, I think this is an important point when thinking about structuring your financial situation, that so all assets, even including the equity in your home, are treated at that 5.6% for colleges who use that profile form. But there are colleges who don't use that and just use the FAFSA, where they're not asking about your home at all. So sometimes when people say, well, does it make sense to take out a home equity loan, or does it make sense to pay off my home? A lot of it depends on the colleges that your son or daughter is applying to, or ultimately the college that he or she ends up going to, as far as how they count that information.
What if your income that junior year is highly different than
Yes.
other years?
Yes, such a good point. So with the whole financial aid process, you'll see it's very, FAFSA, profile. And things change. People have changing circumstances. So do know that financial aid offices, while sometimes they press a button and the calculation happens and they award aid that way, there are people in these offices who look through what you send them, pay attention to different things. So anything in your family situation that isn't really shown on any of these forms, you should absolutely be in touch with the financial aid office. Something like, that was an unusual year and then someone lost a job, or all of those things. The more that you should never be afraid to share. Now, different colleges who have different resources might be able to help more or less, but to the extent that you feel comfortable, share everything so that at least you give yourself you put it all out there and give the college as much information as possible to help you as much as they
At
can.
what point should you do that? After you apply or after you're accepted or?
So great question too. So, well, when you do the forms, if you actually do the forms and say, this doesn't show my situation at all, the profile has a little special circumstances that you could write in there. Or I always say you could send the colleges a letter. Dear financial aid administrator, here's some additional information I'd like you to have when reviewing my file. So,
Right when the kid applies?
Right when the kid applies, if you're using 2015 income and heaven forbid, there was a death or a job loss or something that's so significantly different, absolutely, right up front, let them know. Otherwise, if it's smaller things, like maybe you've had some house repairs or mother-in-law moving in, just some smaller things, then sometimes I say, maybe just wait. And, you will receive the financial aid packages, you'll help your student be trying to make a decision, and if your student's first choice and second choice school are just a little off aid-wise, then maybe you want to call the first choice school and say, can I give you some more information? I mean, this is really where she wants to go, but we just need a little bit more, and then share at that point. So if it's a concrete change, right as soon as you're filing the forms, let them know. Otherwise, you might just want to wait and have an honest conversation later if needed, and then you don't need to have it with all the different schools, but maybe just, the one that he really has his heart set on or something. Yeah.
So MEFA did do the financial aid seminar here already, and I had to leave early, but from that, and she talked about the assets that are in the child's student's name
Mm-hmm.
actually do get counted at a higher rate than the assets of the parents. So can you talk a little bit
Yes,
about that?
yes.
Because if you have, if some grandparent has opened up and, given your child a chunk of change or something, or somebody died, and there's something in their name or that they are an account holder of.
Absolutely.
How should it be handled? What do you recommend?
So assets in the parent's name treated at that 5.6%. Assets in the student's name treated at 20 to 25%. So a big difference. So if it's just you making decisions, it's probably, and 529 plans are considered a parent asset because the parent is the account owner. So if you have choices, maybe just leave it in the parent's name. I would say that only for financial aid purposes. Maybe for other purposes you'd do something different. If, as you say, a grandparent just left money to your child, it's in your child's name, that's the way it is, that would be a special circumstance that you might want to reach out to the college and specifically say, this is college savings left. Now what I'll tell you about that is that a college who uses Profile, who has a lot of resources, and especially even some Ivy League schools just automatically consider it all the same, would maybe say, okay, that's fine, we'll consider that a parent asset treated at the same rate. Public institutions or institutions that don't have that ability or a whole lot of extra resources might at that point say, I'm sorry, we have to treat it at the 20%. The student is the major beneficiary of the education. So you might get different answers, but it's worth just at least saying, we did this X number of years ago before we knew that 529 plans were a better way to save or something like that. So the more you share, the more possibility of receiving that help. So. So I think I have to make us end just because of the next session, right? But thank you, and
Thank you.
so I have a financial aid handout here, gives a whole timeline, and admissions handout, and I left my cards as well. You're welcome.
I can't either.